Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. It's a great opportunity, despite the COVID and lack of people.
Yeah.
But by using the technology, we should be able to reach people, which is great. As I said in the email, what I thought it would be good to do over that sort of time, after that, we'll talk about transport first, and then go from transport to talking about climate change, short topic there in the middle, and then circular economy. But in terms of transport, I was thinking with the questions, if you've got the questions...
I don't have them with me now, but if you just read them out, I can just, we can just do it loose or whatever works is fine.
Otherwise, well, I'll go through them in the order that we wrote them, but we might take them out of order as well. So the first question was, on a scale of 0 to 5, how highly do you rate the need to improve transport in the Huon? I use the word division.
Yeah.
Electorate.
So electorate probably would be good.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. I think I mentioned, earlier I've been outdoor knocking pretty much each and every day, in February, March, and again for the last 2 weeks. And what I'm hearing, regardless of where I am, whether it's now, here in Signet or whether it's down in Geeston, or actually whether it's in Market or not, public transport is an issue, and the context really is, increasing congestion, the waste of time for people to, sit in a car, stuck in traffic. And that's not only, private public transport, but also school transport, school buses to a certain extent as well. So it's a huge issue. Now, I think that's interesting from my point of view, because being talked about, nothing ever happens, right? So plenty of reports, everybody's, supporting public transport, but when it comes to implementation, it's really quite tricky. Public transport, in my opinion, and that is part of it as well, is one of the enablers, because it allows us to access essential services, however we define them, whether it's now work, education, or health services. So if we don't have public transport, because we cannot afford or are unable to access private transport means, people are often stuck. And we know what that means. And we've seen that right now where, we have COVID, people are meant to be staying at home, they can't engage unless you have a workable NBN connection or so. It's going to affect people's sense of well-being, and it's going to affect people's mental health as well. That's why, again, I'm serious when I say, transport and public transport, is meant to be one of the big enablers of society. My main concern is that, all the glossy, fancy reports you find, online, you probably ask about this later on, are very much focused on metropolitan transport. That's really metropolitan stuff left and right and center. I'm not sure how many reports I've read on Melbourne public transport and congestion. It's lovely. But it would be nice to actually have a focus on the regional and depopulated areas. Because just because you live in a regional area doesn't mean you should be missing out, right? So we're paying taxes, rates, levies as well, shouldn't be coming second best. And I've been saying that as one of my mottos of my campaign. It's been taken for granted over and over again. Just because we live in a rural area doesn't mean we should be missing out. And if we are missing out because either public transport is not accessible, doesn't exist, it's not integrated, it's too expensive, or just not feasible, that means it's not going to be used. If it's not going to be used, we're never going to shift the norm away from individualized transport options towards, a shared, model of transport. Again, it's something we would need to address, because otherwise it's going to have implications. And, it's lovely for us to meet, online. I think that's really great. What's the point? We all work from home, we do education from home. But surprisingly enough, you all showed up here. So the preference was for the majority should come here in person to meet face to face, right? So there is a role for, online communication for those issues, but there's also a role for face-to-face meetings. And those meetings need to be accessible from where we are.
You've covered a lot of ground in terms of transport in that first answer. I mean, the question was actually on a 0 to 5 scale. How would you raise it? I think you'd say it's reasonably high, John suggested.
Well, yeah.
It's a bit of an artificial way.
Are we dropping everything just to focus on public transport? I'm not sure we will.
No.
Is it going to be a viable instrument to address inequalities in rural areas? The answer is, of course it is. Is it the most cost-effective way to address those issues? I'm not sure. The data actually isn't out there at all. There's no data. We don't know. Does it mean we shouldn't try it? I think we should. We probably talk about later with the context of climate change and mitigation. How we can use public transport as a great demonstration, project for renewables and so forth.
You've mentioned reports, and the second one is about reports.
Yeah.
You obviously come across a number which you don't think are
really
relevant. Have you seen any that have informed you about transport?
There's only one, and that's actually an oldish one. It's from the UK, and that's a report on regional transport, on transport options for regional and depopulated areas, 5 years old. And I'm not sure whether you've come across it. You are nodding.
No, I haven't seen it.
No, I know that they've done quite a lot of work in the UK and rural areas.
It's interesting, isn't it?
And they do have a much better service.
That's right. And I hope you don't mind me saying that, but in terms of culture and system, it's a very different system as well. And their definition of depopulated area is very different to what our definition is. I used to live and work in Plymouth, in Devon. And that's meant to be in the middle of nowhere, but actually, 500,000 people are living there. I can certainly take public transport there to a place, that's very similar to what the Huon Valley area is, from there without any problems, and it was heavily subsidized at the time. So again, does it apply? I'm not sure, probably not. But I'm also thinking, that the human behaviors are changing so fast in that area. The reports we have from 5 years ago don't necessarily apply now. So how do we keep up? How we develop and keep up the smarts? How develop the evidence, the science that underpins our policy making? It's not quite clear to me we're doing much. So again, if we focus on metropolitan areas, plenty of work done. For regional rural Australia and certainly Tasmania, not so much. There's the LEGCO, there was this LEGCO inquiry in 2013. There was also about integrated transport options. There were some recommendations there. Interesting enough, 7 years later, not much really has happened. So all looks good. Yet another report. The OECD has done 25,000 reports on that, and on regional, on public transport. That's great. They all read really well. The question is, what are we actually going to do? At what stage are we going to use policy initiatives and say, yes, we put it now into practice and see what happens?
And last year, the LEGCO had a committee on congestion, which is very relevant to public transport. That hasn't appeared yet. Would you hurry that one up if you were elected?
So in principle, I think that's a specific question on, how quickly do we need to make reports available, or how quickly does work have to be made available to the public? I yet have to find an argument for keeping reports in the drawer. I just can't see it, and I think there's an argument, for the communities to hold people to account. And you've done a report, the work's done, so let's get it out there and do it. Because otherwise they will be outdated. Most of the stuff doesn't apply anymore. You see this other policy areas as well. It's outdated when it's being published. What's the point? It's not value for money in our opinion.
I think what is quite interesting is about, we talk about the human electorate being a depopulated area.
Yes.
But then you look across Tasmania, and we're not a sole example of that. And so if we came up with some good pilot studies, there's the possibility of them being applied elsewhere, I would imagine. The third question which we put to you was, how would you plan to increase the usage of public transport, carpooling and ride sharing in the electorate?
That's a good one, isn't it? Because to a certain extent, that will take a long time to answer, right? So, because to a certain extent, you need to change the behavior of the consumer by making a product or service available that might be workable at least at some stage during your normal work week. You don't have to use it every day or twice a day. That's the Google test. If you don't use it twice a day, Google is not going to develop it. But for public transport option, for let's say the average working person, If you are considering to use it once a week, all of a sudden that will be a game changer. So I think consumer behavior would change, the moment you pass the 6% threshold of use, or activity. Now, to say there's the one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work in the Huon, right? Because the needs for Huonville potentially are different compared to the needs of Geeston, compared to the needs of Bruny Island. Completely different. Because there's zero transport from Bruny Island. There's no public transport at all. So you need to identify, where you get the good news stories from. Because if it doesn't work, it sets you right back to square one. So you've got to look at, what's your initiative, what's your project, what data do you gather where you're reasonably confident this is going to work and is going to sustain consumer behavior. And then you want to think what's going to happen next, what's going to happen after. Once you've demonstrated it's fine, what are you going to do next? Are you scaling it? Are you doubling down? What's the story there? So any project needs significant community buy-in. It cannot be a top-down approach. Some smart consultant saying this is what we do now, go off the shelf. It doesn't work. It's got to be community-driven. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So you're not going to get the one-size-fits-all approach, there. But you need to address the areas of greatest need. And to be frank, in our electorate right now, there's no public transport on Bruny Island. Half the population is over 65. And you have a ferry.
I was going to say the ferry is sort of public transport.
Well, it is public. It is public transport. It's not only shown off. It's an essential. It's public transport. It's absolutely essential. Of course, it is.
It would surely be an ideal place to have public transport because there is a bus from the ferry, and if there was a bus to the ferry, then people can go across for free.
There's a bus on the ferry.
Don't have to.
One bus to home.
Yeah, but again, I think Liz, you make a really good point and think about the planning as it is now. So the focus was, let's get a brand new ferry. How good is that going to be? That's great. It's actually a smaller ferry. Even if there was a bus, you actually can't get the bus in. Now you say there's a bus stop. The bus stop is actually high up on the ferry road. It's not down there.
Oh, it used to be.
Yeah, that's right. It's no longer there, and there's nothing on the other side. So you say that's fine. Because we've already planned ahead and have plenty of car park. No, actually, you don't have plenty of car park either. So cars are parking along the ferry road. There's no bus stop option. It's going to go up, to the pub. Down where the marina is, that's actually private property. It's closed off. So, and so, for somebody who is a consumer, right, who goes over there at least once a week, for business as a medical practice, would I be using that? Of course I would be using it because I can do some work on the bus, drop off, walk on the ferry, go on the other side. It's just not going to work. So we said, great, let's take the congestion of the ferry, park an old car on the Bruny Island side, drive up, hop on the ferry. But there's actually not enough car parking space to park your old car there. So I can't even do that. So subsequently, I'm sitting in the car, waiting to get on the ferry and to drive off. No, I want. That's what's happening.
It's interesting. Sorry.
I thought you made a good point about as a community trying to get greater usage of the existing facility. So I took the bus up to town yesterday afternoon. I boarded it in Sydney with two others who disembarked in Huonville, and nobody boarded in Huonville. So there was just myself on the bus being driven to Kingston, where I got off and it terminated. And then got another bus with a whole bunch of school kids going into town. But I find it, I'm very pro public transport, but I find it hard to imagine how you're going to justify greater investment when you can readily point to the current facilities and how poor the usage is. And so I wonder whether there's scope for some sort of incentive to be offered. Yes. You're suggesting that each person uses the bus once a week to go to town. If there was some way of giving an incentive to do that.
I think you go out there and ask, what does it take? When would you actually, take public transport? And for some it would be if it was much cheaper, if it was more frequent, it was more comfortable, it was Wi-Fi. I don't know what it is. It's very subjective for me to answer that question, but that's not going to cut it. So you need to go out, ask the people and find the main levers and actually try this in practice. So it's a very stock standard approach. When I'm going down to Geeston, where was, gentlemen, I knocked on the door, said, yeah, I'm a university academic. I don't have to go to uni all the day, I can work from home. But if I take my bus from Geeston to the university, what's the single fare it would cost? $13.50. Right? I've forgotten how long it took it, but it was quite some time. So I'm just sitting in the bus, and it's actually not going to work. It's actually quite expensive for me too. So I would love to use it, but I'm not going to, because A, it's too expensive, and B, it's not viable. Our researcher for the practice lives in Leap, and the bus stop for the Huon Valley practice is just near the Huon Valley practice. So she would drive down in a bus, but she would show up quite late. She can never get to the meeting she needs to attend, and she has to get up quite early because otherwise she's missing it. So that's not ideal, either. What we said, and that's actually our public policy is, when we look at integration, we also need to develop a lot of smarts. If Uber can predict what the demand is in terms of search, we can do the same thing. I would argue, I'll probably know the night before whether I want to take the bus the next morning or not. And I can signpost that via app. So, the Huon Valley bus stop might not be served with a 50-seater bus, but probably only a 16-seater. And if there's all of a sudden a search demand from central command, you can just put another bus up. So you can create some flexibility, because human behavior is actually quite predictable. So once you've done this for a year, you have a basic idea, where 85% service levels. I think it's possible to do.
The airlines certainly do.
Airlines can do that, right? It doesn't work all the time, but it works. I don't think we should be doing search pricing. I don't think it's an option. But the smarts to target demand, I think it is. We also have other, and it's not strictly public transport, but that the community transport service is not for profit as well. It's really sponsored by government grants as well. Those guys are there. They're ordinary cars driving on the lot. It's usually a driver and a person. We have school buses operated by contractors. So they are going in the morning and then they go in the afternoon, and I see them parked during the day. And they're just not doing anything. So we have real estate parked. I'm not. I mean, that's what it is. I'm not sure that's how it must be. So it's possible to address it, but we also need to be very clear. Public transport might not give you the answers to all the problems we have, but it might help us to overcome inequalities in accessing health service, educational services, and jobs in depopulated regional areas.
But it's an interesting point to make about the cost, because we talked within circular economy about the cost.
Yeah.
And it's even more than come up with over. So
yes.
$20.
Yes.
And it's also people spending more money on private.
That's right. Yeah.
Private cars. There's a figure that Bastian on the other end of the computer came up with, which was talking about $8,000 to run a car.
Yeah.
A total of $84 million spent in the valley, I think.
Yes. Changing the subject somewhat from public transport, talking about reducing emissions.
Yeah.
In terms of increasing the uptake of electric vehicles,
yes.
Have you got thoughts about how that could be achieved?
Yes, I'll give you. So I'm probably not coming with a high up academic thinking
we might not
that
understand
we already know about, because I don't think it actually works really well. I'll give you an example. My wife and I run the practice in Huon Valley. We also have the Signet family practice, the Signet medical service. We are in Franklin Brunei Island. And we looked at, how can we reduce our carbon footprint as a health organization? Because for health organizations, actually not much out there. There just isn't, it's a bit for hospitals, but not for community practices. And one of the biggest, carbon emitters, unfortunately, was driving to and from work because we are quite transport intensive. You know, in Brunei Island was a real problem because we are now commuting an hour there, an hour back. The distance is just a complete problem for us. And we weren't necessarily comfortable with that. So what we came up with, and we looked at how do we how can we reduce, you know, our carbon footprint and incentivize our staff to do that as well, was to make sure we get the most fuel efficient cars for the practice. So people can take their dodgy car or bicycle or public transport to the practice. Once they are there to do a home visit, they can, you know, take one of the more efficient cars. Now there are certain parameters we had. It had to be a tax deduction, it had to be a business write-off. At the time it was $20,000. It had to be practical and workable. So all of a sudden, all hybrid cars were out. They would never have worked anyway because most of the time we are driving, not standing, because it's overland travel. All electric cars were out, so we just could not afford that. You know, there's no way we could get, you know, one of the Hyundais for 50 grand or a Tesla for 70, or even a used Nissan for 25. Yes, that's right. But at the time, it was not possible for us to do. So we decided, let's get the most carbon-friendly car for $20,000. There was, you know, not the Volkswagen Beetle I had there, 171, but it was a Volkswagen Polo, you know, at the time. That was the most efficient one. And surprisingly enough, that's now really good because we now have people cycling to work from Ranelagh. We have, you know, sometimes people cycling from work from Hobart, who just go one way and then take the fuel-efficient car back. People take, you know, public transport, you know, to the practice. So that's quite all right. So I don't mind doing this. So for us, it was a way of reducing our carbon footprint, understanding that we need very flexible transport option. You know, that's just based on what the business is like. Just to be reliable, you know, cost effective as well. If you had said, you know, the battery car would have been much cheaper, or there would have been a tax incentive, and we would have had, you know, a charging station, you know, in our practice, that would be a different story. It just was an option at the time.
Probably means moving to Norway to get that, doesn't it?
Look, I'm not actually sure. So I'll give you an example. So, you know, we said, and that's party policy, and that, you know, we need to enable schools to be places where, you know, electric charging and charging should occur. I think that makes a fair bit of sense.
Yeah. Can I ask you? I mean, this is not a question included here, but federal level, are they interested in somehow, when they get back into office, reducing prices of electric vehicles in the way that some countries have in terms of tax incentives and so on?
Yeah, so I can't give you the exact data on what the incentive is going to be, because realistically that's going to change with Syria. And I'm also aware that some of the initiatives that have been done, you know, in Germany, other European countries, America, where you subsidize the electric car, is probably not the taxpayer's best interest. And personally, I think, you know, if you can afford a Tesla for $80,000, whether it's now $80,000 or $85,000, don't tell me that's going to be the main drive for you to purchase a Tesla. But it's $5,000 of taxpayers' money gone that we can put somewhere else. Right? For $5,000, I can treat a family, you know, in community care, you know, for 3 years. And I would say, you know, I don't want to subsidize the Teslas anymore, you know, because I don't think that's where the money should go. That's my personal opinion. So you have to be careful that we don't subsidize the one where the consumer behavior wouldn't have been influenced in the first place. Should we consider looking at how do we equip our public assets and convert them, and, you know, whether it's now electric buses or whether it's hydrogen buses? We'll talk about this probably later. I would imagine yes, because it's a public asset. You know, fair enough. If technology is actually there, you know, it's being done. There's some issues because, you know, only one company is doing the conversions in Australia. But again, it's possible to do. Why not trying that, you know, to a certain extent in an area like ours? If it means reduce carbon footprint and make the bus fares potentially cheaper, it's good go.
I accept what you're saying, but I draw on an experience in the solar industry, and it was criticised for the same reasons. the suggestion that it was middle-class welfare.
Yeah.
But it did stimulate the industry and
Yes.
get it to a critical mass size that then enabled it to become more available to everyone.
Yeah.
So if you look at the individual and say, well, they don't need $5 grand, yeah, you're not going to do it. But if you look at the effect it might have on the manufacturing process and the like, then there's potentially an argument to go down that path.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. But again, and I'm probably going to be clear because we will be running out of money one way or the other, right, in particular now. So that was the German approach. They felt, photoelectric electronic work, solar power is the next big thing. And they felt, we have all the patents, we have the industry know-how, we can produce the cells ourselves. So therefore, they heavily subsidized the consumer demand. They heavily invested in research and development. 10 years later, all the manufacturing is now gone from Germany into Southeast Asia. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what happened. Hopefully, somebody is looking at the data of how much investment still pays off because we've changed consumer behavior and reduced our carbon footprint. I can't answer that question. I'm just saying, in Australia, if we really want to look at what's our next technology that we can push that creates jobs, adds values, and respects nature and our environment, my feeling is that it might be hydrogen more than anything else, in particular what is
I think we've probably dealt with question 5, what other transport issues try and address just gas. We've covered a lot of areas. And then the 6th question was, do you regularly use public transport? If yes, how can you improve? And again, we've talked about that, and if no, why not? But, so is there anything else you want to mention about transport before we go on to talking about transport?
No, but again, so public transport, do I use it? So I use the ferry, that's number one. If we had a shared bicycle scheme in Huon Valley, I potentially would do it because I try and cycle from home, which is the Martin River, to the practice.
Interesting point, yeah.
So that's what works. I'm not sure, cycling shared, that would be part of public transport as well. Per definition, I don't think would be working really well. So the metropolitan ones have tried this, and all these bicycles disappeared in the rivers. The Vancouver example is probably the best when it comes to integrating cycling with public transport and buses, because you can take your bicycle, put it in a front rack. Right, so it doesn't go in the bus, it's front rack bus. Now that would be a game changer if we were able to do that. Now there are transport safety issues, but it's easy enough to do. Yeah, so and that would be fabulous because we could then address the final 500 meters, the final kilometer, one way or the other, and it would be safe. The bike is not getting stolen. People can use their home. So nice. That would be easy. Now, if you can do that for public transport, you can probably do this for school buses as well. And at some stage, you have to start with kids. If the best thing you can do is use your private car to drop your kids off at kindergarten or school, they just don't know better. But private car. At some stage, we have to start. And the school bus contractors aren't supported well enough. Made some comments on seat belts and school buses and so forth as well. They are meant to do more and more and more with less and less funding. I would think that should be great. Kids would want to be on a bus because it's great. I'd rather take the bus, than dad's car. That's what it should be.
There's a lot of issues around transport which we talked about. I probably will continue to do so, but it's nice to think that there are some solutions. Probably that feeling by publics for some of them. In terms of climate change, changing the nature of the discussion, I'm really talking about action.
Yeah.
I suppose on climate change. So if you look at this area, I mean, say over other things that you think of that would should be, the idea would be possible. And the state government and local governments could combine to do collectively.
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's always the risk that you get sort of off-the-shelf answers, and I'm not sure that would be reasonable. I think the premise is often, when I hear a question like that, is that climate change is a problem. How are we going to manage that? And you will have known, I've done plenty of research in the climate change area, climate change mitigation, teaching adaptive expertise, that sort of stuff, plenty of work in there. And I just don't think we get people on board, once we say, it's a problem, we need to fix it. It's not, it's possible, but we don't capture, the spirit of a lot of people. I'm now tempted to say, I would like to see climate change as an opportunity. And if we don't grasp the opportunity as Tasmanians, then, we never get this opportunity again. It's just not going to work. So how are we going to make this work? You ask 5 people, you get 5 different opinions. And, that's highly subjective. And sometimes some opinions, projects and stuff. I think if I want to go back of how we use it, I want to use climate change as an enabler for jobs. We have to look at jobs, for Tasmania. That's just the way it's going to be. And the more I read and the more I speak to economists and to scientists and environmentalists, we actually always go back on hydrogen as this the main thing. Now, I know lots of buzz out there. Is this really, the best we can do? I think we need to explore this, quite deeply, because that might be an opportunity for us as Tasmanians to contribute really actively in reducing, fossil fuels worldwide, because we could potentially produce carbon neutral certified hydrogen and export this to countries who have a demonstrated demand. No, that's not me saying that. It's the Grattan Institute saying that. It's all backed up, by various initiatives. And great, all Australian states have committed, to a hydrogen strategy, all signed up. And most states have already started some demonstration projects. And in Tasmania, we've done a report.
Do you see it as being compatible with the Marinus link, which would allow the export of the electricity without being processed in any way?
Look, I don't think we should focus